Good evening and welcome to the Brockton School Committee meeting. This is a subcommittee of the Safety, Security, Transportation Subcommittee meeting. Today is Tuesday, March 11th. The time is 6 p.m. We are located at the Dr. William H. Arnone Theater at 135 Belmont Street in the wonderful city of Brockton. In addition to attending this, the public can view this meeting via television, Comcast Channel 8, 1071 HD version, or online via this link, www.youtube.com/TheBrocktonChannels. And I will call this meeting to order and establish a quorum. Mrs. Sullivan?
Here.
Mr. Vega?
Here.
Ms. Oliver?
Here.
Ms. Azak?
Here.
Mr. Sullivan?
Here.
And Dr. Tiliani, Superintendent President, myself, Tony, as a chair, and Mr. Gomes is not with us this evening. And I will hand the floor over to the superintendent where she will give us a transportation update.
All right, good evening, everyone. So I'm excited to provide you with the transportation update today. This is not going to be the last, as we have a lot going on in transportation right now, and will be from now until the end of the school year. So to start, I just wanted to provide you with the scope of the transportation that we are providing at this time. Here you will see that we transport a total of 839 students to the surrounding schools, such as New Heights, Trinity Upper and Lower, Norfolk, and Bristol Aggie, and Cardinal Spellman. These numbers have stayed the same since the start of the school year when I presented this to you. However, we have had some other changes. We have 1,593 students on door-to-door. This is up 332 students since November when you saw this chart last. 76 students go out of district, which is up 1 from November, and 430 students who are covered under McKinney-Vento, which is up 11 students from November. And what is not indicated here is that we do have 8,596 students who are on our big yellow buses, which has stayed mostly steady. So one of the issues that was identified early on was the lack of valid contracts that had rates for our private vendors. So that is something that we had begun working on to rectify by reviewing all of the files, adding routes and rates and signatures to the agreements, and uploading those documents into Munis. So here you'll see a tracker that I've shown you before. That is something that we're keeping up with in order to ensure that we are continuing to go through this process. And just as a reminder, too, when we reviewed our 253 vendor files, we found that only 90 were actively transporting students. And for those 90, we have executed letters of agreement that have been signed by myself, the mayor, and then scanned into Munis. We have also collected the certificates of insurance. So you can see on this bar graph, last time you saw it, there were still items that were waiting to be done. Now they've all been done for all of our current active vendors. So now what we're doing is we are in the process of, since we have certificates of insurance on file for everybody, we are now in the process of updating those certificates that will be expiring mid-year. So now that we have this process, we're able to make sure that we're staying on track and that we're never losing any or never going any amount of time where there is a driver that does not have an updated certificate of insurance. So this gives you an idea of our private transportation costs that have been incurred thus far this school year. So this is data that has been provided by the Transportation Department as of just yesterday. So this adds in total to about $4.5 million. And so this shows you where that money sits. So how much of it is door-to-door, how much is out of district, McKinney-Vento, and how much is our general ed students. And if you're wondering why we may have general ed students on private transportation, that could be for a number of reasons, including field trips, but also including those times when perhaps we do have a bus driver call out and we're unable to cover it with our own internal bus fleet. Then to look at the overall cost of our expenditures thus far, which are in gray, as compared to the money that has been encumbered. So that is money that we have spent and need to pay out. So overall, thus far this year, we have spent $11 million on transportation. So here you see that same information, but one of the things that we've been talking about, not just in transportation and budget and several other areas, is that we are in a situation where we are having to make a system more efficient when our infrastructure itself is lacking. And so what I mean by that is our data systems are also imperfect. So we have not only been, because we have not been appropriately inputting and tracking data over time, again, it's difficult to try to build systems at the same time that we're trying to improve systems. So that poses some challenges, but we are making headway on both fronts. So this gives you an example of one of those areas where our consultant, Open Architects, has been supporting us with not only ensuring that we're capturing the data appropriately, but also in allowing us to manipulate the data to improve efficiency. So they just rolled out this dashboard that allows us to track our spending and our expenses that we do believe will be helpful to increase efficiencies moving forward. Because again, you can do a pull from Munis, but also there are some things that it will not capture as easily. However, this is fed from Munis, and right there you can see what our spending is, the 10.8 thus far, so about the 11 million that I mentioned, also against our revised budget, which was the 16 million, because that includes the recent appropriation of the 6 million from City Council. But doing it this way, we can also kind of break it down into several different groups, so we can even see it by all funds, we can see it by different funding sources, and so this will help us hopefully to implement some new efficiencies moving forward. So we're also trying to leverage the technology we already have to increase efficiency. And I know that many, both here and at City Council, have mentioned the large purchase of tablets that went into our buses and how we are utilizing those. So the district had purchased tablets for our buses that we do need to better utilize. 135 buses have GPS tablets and combo readers. 124 of the buses are actively reporting data and appear to be fully operational. So we are tapping back into that system and seeing how it's working. So tablets are still receiving updates, and most were actually communicated with the server on Friday, March 7th of 2025, so as recently as last week. So again, the system is still operational and was able to provide real-time bus locations. But now it's about how are we actually leveraging that to communicate with our families. So we do want to leverage this better moving forward because the tablets allow us to do several things. They do allow drivers and bus aides to clock in and out via the tablets, which we would like to look into. Time tracking was actually originally purchased to integrate with Munis, so bus monitors and drivers could automatically sign in and sign out and then be integrated into Munis. So this is the best case scenario, right, where we want to leverage our systems where one data system is actually feeding another one. So we can use this system to immediately feed Munis and make sure that that we are paying the appropriate people, that when we have bus monitors on, we know if they're attending or not, whereas a lot of those systems right now are done manually, and obviously that takes more time, effort, and human resources. The tablets also have the ability to scan students in and out, and that is something that we're just considering moving forward, just for safety purposes. There, I think also for the apps, if we're using the apps, like parents could even. So that's something we're going to explore. We haven't thought about that moving forward much, but one of the areas that could be incredibly helpful is in the cases that we are using our own, in the cases that we need to track attendance to those out-of-district placements to other places, because we do have provisions in our letters of agreement that do change pricing and cost when students aren't attending. But right now, because again, everything is done manually, you actually have to look at an invoice, you have to compare it to the attendance. So there's not only safety benefits to this, but there are also tracking benefits to this as well. The student ID verification and the parent app are still actively reporting data, but again, we're just not using the app at this point. It would cost us $18 per bus per month for all of the software features. So that's the turn-by-turn navigation, the time tracking, student scanning, and the parent tracking app. So that is definitely something we are considering for the future, since we do have the hardware already to be able to use the software would be great. Any buses added after the initial 135 would require additional hardware, and that's $1,000 per bus. Training is free if we internally provide a train-the-trainer model. So the instructional technology team, we worked with them, and they believe that they can handle the training internally if needed, again, allowing for an efficient and cost-effective rollout, and then also allowing for when we have new bus drivers coming on board, that we can continue to have training being provided. So we are a lot of different slides. I'm going to be going through some of the things that we're exploring to, again, be more efficient and be more cost effective. So at a city council meeting, I think it was former Vice Chair Tom Minicello that had brought up the idea of potentially cutting costs by offering reimbursements to parents who may be able and willing to get their child to school on their own. Now we've been watching all of the meetings, we're listening to all the comments. We don't feel like there are any ideas that are not worth exploring at this time. So we did explore this idea. We contacted 20 families that are experiencing homelessness to see if this may be of interest, and these were the results, which were obviously not very promising. So we didn't go too much further down this road, but it is something we could continue to explore. But these are the reasons, no response, no vehicle, they're unable to accept calls. Now, we only did this for our students who are covered under McKinney-Vento because we already have this conversation with parents during IEP meetings. So those students are already captured. When students qualify for transportation as a result of their specific disability, this is a conversation that we engage with them in about whether they would be able or willing to provide transportation to their child. But again, something we can continue to explore. Another comment that we've heard, and another thing that we have been looking at, is the number of bus driver absences. So right now here you can see over the course of the year the number of absences by month. So that's like the total number of absences. And yes, it is quite a bit, but I also believe that this is somewhat this is a problem that we could potentially resolve, and a little bit is potentially a problem of our own making at this point in time, when our bus drivers are unsure if we are going to be continuing a contract with them or hearing about us going out to bid. I have let them know that we are definitely negotiating a one-year contract moving forward, but there may be a sense of using your absences so you don't lose them in the case that we completely go out again. And so one of the things that we were already thinking about to address the number of absences that we're seeing with bus drivers was in the negotiations for the collective bargaining agreement moving forward. However, that doesn't resolve the issue that we're seeing this year. So one of the things we are looking at right now is mid-year incentives and maybe a memorandum of agreement about the incentives, either because right now we have an incentive, but it's only given like once a year, which is not as, it's not as appealing as maybe it was done, monthly or a few times a year. Another thing that I know has been talked about is rolling over personal days into sick days, and maybe a commitment to do that now. Otherwise, again, folks are using their personal days because they're going to lose them. So these are some things that we're looking at right now to potentially make it easier for the rest of the school year, as we do still have a few months left. What you see on this chart on the left is sort of, we wanted to look at what does a day in the life of transportation look like. So on the right, you see sort of the longitudinal data for the year of absences, but on the left, you'll see, okay, buses and drivers on a given day. In February, there were 121 in and 15 out. Then there were 2 buses being utilized for field trips. So we had to then have private vendors used to cover those absences. And that's that amount of money that I was saying, why would we have general ed under, private transportation? This is that exact instance. there were 5 buses late for pickup or drop off. Again, they're doing their multiple tiers. And then there were unforeseen issues with 2 of the buses that day. There can be several things that can happen, traffic, accidents, things like that. So every day in the transportation department there's a lot going on, and there are a lot of different puzzle pieces. There are private transportation that needs to be called immediately. So I just wanted to kind of give you this broader overview of the fact that, it is very complicated and does end up being costly. And some of these things we can predict and solve for, and others are a little bit more challenging. So some of the things that we are doing is we are trying to leverage the expertise that we have. So we have actually started to provide additional support from central offices to the transportation department, because one of the things that came through in the audit loud and clear is that we don't have enough support in the transportation office. So we are deploying more support from our central offices, and we're doing that in the form of staff, but we're also doing that in the form of services that we're providing, like trying to make their systems more efficient, that I'll get into in a little bit. The transportation consultants, obviously you are all aware that we did the transportation audit. However, we have also now brought in a consultant from First Student that actually was somebody who worked in this district for a while, who has expertise in this area, that will be able to provide us with some technical expertise and be able to help us as we are kind of solving for the problems. Because one of the issues with having central office folks helping to solve the problems is we don't necessarily always speak the language of transportation. And if we're, trying to be creative, trying to problem solve or troubleshoot, sometimes we do need sort of an external viewpoint of, is this something that's feasible or not? We are also looking at hiring staff for specialized roles. I'll talk about that a little bit more in another slide, but that is something that we, again, from the transportation audit, it was clear that was necessary, but because there are some systems that were really lacking and that kind of got lost in the shift from external transportation to internal, we have identified that there are areas and systems that are not being implemented the way they once were. And that, I'll talk a little bit about it more, but actually right now I'll just say it's the accuracy of the invoices, it's the checking of the absences, it's the making sure we're not being double charged. Those are the things that once lived with the current transportation folks who are now in the transportation office when they were doing it internally as employees of BPS. Then when the whole operation came under BPS, to be able to provide those additional tasks, that was something that got lost. So that was something that we just recently realized was not getting done, was not something that was being double checked on, but it was in the past. So that is an area where we need to build the system and hire staff, because it can't continue to go undone. And then again, we're just leveraging the current staff that we have in order to create more efficiencies in the department. So a couple of other things that we have been doing, again, in response to some of the feedback that we have gotten, is there were definitely some concerns about just the overall vendor safety transportation. And so we did get all of the certificates of insurance. And we have made sure that all of their queries are completed. But another additional check that we have been doing is actually our security director, Rob Jackson, has been doing random safety and security checks of our vendors. And there's a form that's filled out to make sure that, we have all of the necessary verification, that they have the appropriate license, that they are registered, they have the proof of insurance, they have visible bus signs. There have been a couple of instances that I know I've heard from the community and I've heard from some of you where, for example, there was an accident and the person who was driving the bus maybe wasn't somebody who was supposed to be driving the bus. So now we are doing these random checks to make sure that that the person who's driving the bus is exactly who was supposed to be, who the vendor told us was going to be, because we know that those are the people who've been query checked, who have the licenses and all of that. So this is an extra step that we are taking to make sure that even though we have all of the appropriate documentation, that the actual practice looks the way it should. Another thing that we have put into place is creating a competitive bidding process so that we can start to compile. Again, it's about collecting and compiling the data and tracking it over time so that we can build more efficiencies. So to tell you a little bit more about that, one of the first steps that we took to implement cost-saving measures was to conduct a comprehensive audit of vendor invoices. We started with the vendor that we have paid the most to date from the start of the school year. We downloaded all of the invoices and entered the data into a spreadsheet. And we then methodically cross-referenced the appropriate school calendar, because again, some of these students are going to a different school, to make sure the schools were actually in session and confirmed that the student attended that day. Finally, we also reviewed to make sure that the billing or that the math of the invoices added up. Over a 7-month billing period that was reviewed, we found that this one vendor, so again, we did it for one vendor to start, the highest paid vendor, that this vendor was paid approximately $276,000 to transport 11 students via 9 routes since the start of the school year. There was also overbilling of 3 students for a total of 13 days who do not attend school, as well as some of the other miscellaneous issues such as student names being misspelled. Again, that means the data can be inaccurately tracked over time. So now we are going through this process vendor by vendor. And like I said, we have to enter this data into a spreadsheet. It doesn't live somewhere already. And we're alerting each vendor of the overbilling, and we're considering adding penalties for overbidding for vendors moving forward. But I think this is an example of an area, and I know I've heard this anecdotally, but it's about finding the data to prove it. I've heard anecdotally that we are paying a lot for our vendors, or we're paying too much. And so what does that actually look like in practice? And so that's what we have been auditing. Now, in order to resolve that, another method we've used to yield cost savings was to take a look at our students who are assigned to the same out-of-district assignment. So, for example, so that was for everything I just said. Sorry, I forgot to move the transportation or the slide forward. So another method that we took to yield cost savings was to take a look at our students who were assigned to the same out-of-district assignment. So that's out-of-district placement 1, just whatever that is. For example, we were able to discern that these 7 students were attending the same out-of-district placement. However, due to the existing bidding procedures, the way they existed, we seemed to bid out each route or student one at a time. And now, this is understandable given that a lot of these students are coming in throughout the school year. However, by doing this, we obviously found that we were then paying way more than we needed to pay. So we were paying $1,937.66 per day to transport these 7 students who reside in Brockton to the same out-of-district placement that is approximately 20 miles away. So we knew we could do better and had to cluster the students to be transported. So we did, in this case, have to put out 2 separate bids for routes because one student of the 7 did require to be transported individually based on their needs. So sometimes that will happen based on like the IEP or special needs. However, instead of having 7 different routes that we're paying $1,937 for, now we just have 2 bus drivers who are taking them. So we put that out competitively. So we put out 1 bid for a single student that had to travel alone, and then we put out a second bid for the remaining 6 students. It is important, again, to note that we also put out a maximum amount for the bid that was acceptable to us. So now we're doing this all electronically, not over email. We're doing it on the form that I showed you earlier so that we can then gather all of the data, download it to a spreadsheet, and then see here are all of the different bids. And the results, and then we are stating very clearly, this is the amount, it cannot go above. Now, if you bid below, even better, but we're not accepting anything over this amount. So the results were, which you can't really see here, which is too bad, but they were remarkable. So for the lowest bid for the route with the single student came in at 100, while the lowest bid for the other route with the 6 students came in at 249. So essentially what we've done in this situation is instead of paying $1,937.66 for those students to be transported each day, we were able to rebid the routes to instead decrease that daily rate to $349 a day. So we're essentially saving $1,600 a day. This means that the district could be saving over $31,000 per month. Now, I provide this as an example because, again, we're doing it all manually. And part of this is us discovering and like sort of the systems that exist, the systems that don't exist, that need to be built in. And then how can we systemize this moving forward? So if you go back, so this Microsoft form over here is now how we have done this for a few of these routes. And we're going to continue to do it this way for the rest of the routes for this school year. And again, we're prioritizing based on those vendors that are bringing in the most amount of money. Now we're also going to look at, we also did it by placement, and then we'll be doing it by the routes that are most expensive. So we're trying to prioritize so that we can get kind of the most bang for our buck in cost savings. So as you can see, we're working to implement a lot of improvements, but it is slow going. It is taking time, especially again as we're fixing this as we go. So again, some of our immediate next steps have been what I've already mentioned, such as doing the invoice review to ensure billing is accurate, rebidding routes, identifying ways to leverage our internal bus, our internal buses rather than using private vendors, and conducting safety and security checks. However, we have also, something I haven't mentioned, is we've sunsetted some of our transportation altogether. So for example, we were originally providing transportation to our re-engagement center for our New Beginnings program, and we are no longer doing that, as that was costing now $19,000 per month and is not really something we are required to provide. So while it's nice to provide it and while we want to be able to support, there are some areas where we just kind of need to draw the line and to build in more efficiencies. As you know, we are also working on a formal bid to go out for transportation for next year. And my hope is that instead of having 99 private vendors, maybe we'll attract a few vendors that can provide transportation for all of our students who require transportation under McKinney-Vento or under their IEP. So that is going to be one of the options that's in the bid. You could bid for all of our transportation altogether. You could bid for gen ed. You could bid for, like, there will be a menu in our bid so that multiple different kinds of bids can be provided, because we do have internal buses that we would like to leverage. So that would be my ideal scenario, is to be able to utilize our buses for general ed, for field trips, for some of our, our younger students or special ed students who need special vans, and then be able to utilize just a couple of large vendors for those expenses that are costing us the more and that require the most amount of checking, which are the private vendors. We are also working to negotiate a one-year contract, as I've said, with our bus drivers that is more efficient and that incentivizes good attendance. We've also revised our current transportation memo to include terms that are more beneficial to us. So that's a memo that goes out to our private vendors when they are becoming vendors for us. We've also raised our we are also, like I said, checking student attendance against invoices, and we're establishing a system and have posted for an administrative assistant that will do that task specifically moving forward. And we have interviews for that this week, because this is a pretty large undertaking. As for longer term solutions, we are going to be restructuring our transportation office to better meet our operational needs and to better align to the audit that we received. Because like I've said, we are trying to put support in right now, but that is not what it should look like long term. So thinking about it for next year, and you'll see that reflected in the budget that's presented to you. We are also going to be setting up our parent information center so that they can submit requests that result in automatic bids going out. So when they receive the student, then they could put out the bid. We'll be using our bus tablets more efficiently, and that includes using the bus app for parents. We will be using our Versatrans software functionality that allows it to align directly to Munis for invoicing. So again, that would be another huge win for us. And finally, we are exploring programmatic shifts, such as one of the ones that we have heard is moving pre-K to a different tier. Now, we've done a cost analysis of this and just an analysis of our internal buses, and our current thinking is that moving one school, the Barrett Russell, that is all pre-K, to a different tier would actually be optimal. Now, we know that this may be disruptive to families, but students do generally attend pre-K for 2 years. Plus, if many parents, it may actually work out better because then they're dropping off at Barrett Russell first, and then they can make it to an older sibling school. But if we were to, for example, move Barrett Russell, it would to a different tier, it would free up 11 Brockton Public School small buses to be used in Tier 3, which then eliminates the need to hire 11 Tier 3 vans. Additionally, we have heard directly from the Barrett Russell that because of the hiring of private vans, there are a lot of concerns that come along with that, especially given different vendors, different faces, and the students that they are transporting. So we've heard from their school leader as well about the current system not really working for them as it is. So this could potentially be a solution. However, and you can put more students on a BPS small bus than on some of these private transportation vans. But this is a conversation that we will be having during union negotiations with the BEA. So as you know, the move to the tier that pre-K is currently on was as a result of negotiations. So it would need to be negotiated again. We are in a negotiations year. I have spoken to the BEA president about us exploring this. Obviously, we know it's subject to negotiations, but it will be a topic that we want to look into further. And then just to and I just wanted to ground us in some of the data and trends around the state. So this was actually a slide that was presented at MMA recently. I think the mayor was talking about attending this conference, and that this was a common issue overall. And so while my intention is not to make excuses for any efficiencies that exist in our own transportation system or cost-saving measures that, as I have mentioned today, we absolutely should and will be working on implementing, it is still important to note that transportation costs have gone up tremendously around the state and that all districts are feeling these impacts. In fact, tomorrow there is a legislative breakfast that is being hosted by I know you all received an invitation, the Massachusetts Association for School Superintendents South Shore Roundtable of Superintendents. And this is one of the main topics that is going to be addressed with our legislators, is about the rising costs of transportation and the need for greater reimbursement back to the school district. So this is something we need to be handling locally, but also we need to be advocating for on a state level as well. And that is something we are doing jointly with all other superintendents because this is a commonly shared problem. And I think it was in the anticipation of these raised costs over time that actually caused Brockton Public Schools to bring transportation in the first place, right? So the prices were going up. That was seen, and it was like, how do we save costs? We bring in transportation. And we see a lot of districts doing that right now. And while we are certainly experiencing bumps in the road in our implementation, I am not 100% convinced that we would not be in a similar position had we continued to stay with external vendors. We would still be like other districts, subject to higher costs. We may still be having similar conversations about how are we going to sustain this financially. Right now, what we're doing is having a conversation about how we have now the internal resources. How do we leverage them better so that we can, because we are in a fortunate position of having some control over this. So how are we exerting that control to our best benefit? And so that's why we are doing our best to make our current system work more efficiently. As I continue to say at the transportation roundtable meetings we have with the mayor, the city council president, the vice chair, we admit that there is a lot of work to be done in transportation, and there are a lot of areas that just need to be fixed. And so I just gave you some examples today of some real issues and real cost savings that we are trying to implement. But I know it is slow going, and it is frustrating to everyone here and in the community because this is such a slow process. But I just want to assure everybody that we are working on this both in the short term of trying to implement these cost savings and build systems and efficiencies, but also then we are thinking of the long term and hoping that we will be better poised in the future to have a more efficient and cost effective system, especially as we're going out for formal bid and building these systems this year. Sorry.
Thank you, Superintendent, for that wonderful presentation as always. And I know, I know. This is a hot topic in the city. Obviously, transportation costs, as the superintendent, it's been skyrocketing across the Commonwealth. So we just have to tackle some issues and how to save some funds so that we can use it elsewhere. Obviously, that's non-net, but early on, we knew that when we brought this transportation, we know there was going to be hiccups, and these are one of the hiccups, but we didn't want it to be a big hiccup. But we're tackling that. So with that, I know we have a lot of questions. We'll open up the floors to the members. I'll start with Mrs. Azak, followed by Ms. Oliver, followed by Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Superintendent. That was a lot. So as always, thank you for being very thorough. I'm one of the members that was actually on the committee when we brought in our own transportation company. So many don't know, and just as a reminder, when we first came on the committee, I think it was leasing. Every year, we were leasing the buses at, I want to say it was $64,000 a bus. And then before COVID, I think we were in the $84,000 or maybe even $90,000. So the price just kept going up and up and up. And this was every single year. We were spending millions on leasing the buses. So, bringing in the transportation company, we knew it wasn't going to be easy. We hit hiccups. Seeing some of this and just going through and tweaking things, especially with the private vendors. Some of the ideas that you mentioned were mentioned to some of us before, you became our superintendent. As far as the Barrett Russell ways, believe it or not, we do have a lot of, I know I have bus drivers that reach out to me and say, Joyce, there's better ways we can do things, or there's better ways we can cut corners, and not in a bad way cutting corners, but cutting corners like, overlapping some of the routes and stuff. They're our experts. They're on the road. These are their routes. So anytime they reach out, I listen, and I'll always, forward any information I have. Now, a couple of things is when we first got the transportation, I know there was the Find My Bus. I get it. We have a lot of routes. It's a big city. That took forever, and we still don't have it. So I know a lot of parents want to be able to track. One other issue I have, and I'm going to limit it because I'm sure we're all going to have similar questions, is with the private vendors. Now, is there a way we can have the students have an ID and it's scanned when they get to the school, or it's scanned when they get into the vehicle, so we can better keep track of, yes, this student was picked up this date. We're not just paying for private vendors and the students are not being picked up or taken to their location.
So like I mentioned, that is something that we are exploring for the future. I don't know that we'll be able to get it up and running by the end of this school year. It does come with a cost that I think we're willing to pay. I think our biggest concern right now is that the place we need this most is in our private vendors. And that is the place where we do think we are going to be streamlining next year. And we want to see what's going to happen with the formal bid process, because, we could certainly do that with all, spend a few months putting that in place for all 99 now. But if we end up with a different model next year, that will have been time that wasn't spent well. Mm-hmm. So we kind of want to see what is the long-term plan going to look, at least, and by long-term I mean even just 3 years, what's it going to look like in a few months and for the next few years, and then explore that. Because yes, it's still going to be a need. It's certainly great for safety purposes, for parents to be able to see that their child got on the bus, got off the bus, got on the bus at the end of the day. That would be of great comfort. But then also for invoicing, and because these systems can actually talk with Munis, that would really be incredible. So it's definitely something we are going to continue to work on. I just don't know that we're going to be able to implement it by end of year.
Okay, so I know that's a work in progress. The other issue is, now I saw some of the numbers. I'll go back and watch the slideshow and take better notes. But so for example, New Heights, 674 students. How many buses are we actually sending there? 674 students is a lot, but how many actual physical buses are going there that were taken away from, like, Brockton Public Schools?
Right. So I actually don't know the number of buses. I do know our buses carry, like 30 students each. I can get the number of buses. What I do know is that one of the things that we followed up on earlier this year with New Heights is just making sure, because we are required to provide transportation to schools in the same, that follows the same policy we have implemented. So, for example, we provide to Cardinal Spellman because we provide transportation to our high schoolers. That is our own policy. If that is not something we were doing, that is not something we would then be required to do for these other schools, if that makes sense. So one of the things that we did do is we just double checked with them at the beginning of this year to make sure that they were following the mileage that we follow, just to make sure that we didn't have additional students on that didn't fall within the miles. I can get back to you on the number of buses, but I do know that we're at least following the policy, that we have checked that all those students are going there and do require transportation, and that the addresses have been checked to make sure they fall within the parameters of our policy.
So I know for our students, they have to provide documentation that they actually live at that address.
Correct.
So I'd be just curious, I don't know offhand how many students actually go to that one specific school, but 674 is a huge number to be busing. So I'd like to see, we have a very, I'm sorry?
735 students.
So out of 735, 674 take a bus. That's. I'd love to see, like, our documentation, because I know they're strict. We all get calls. We're a little closer, but my child needs busing. We have to adhere to certain restrictions when it comes to how far away are you from the school. I'd like to see, So I just want to make sure, because that's a huge number for busing.
So we did double check
that
at the beginning of the school year, and that number has not changed at all. So we checked every single address, made sure they were getting the documentation, because obviously that would have been a quick savings for us. So that was an easy place to go quick. Unfortunately, it didn't garner any savings because they are getting the appropriate documentation, and we checked every single address.
Okay. And then we have that. And then, I apologize, I drew a blank. So I know the busing, as far as number of buses, things like that. I'm sure I'll remember my other questions, but I mean, this is such an involved topic. So our high school, like you just mentioned, we have to provide busing for elementary and middle. There's nothing that states that we have to provide for high school. We do it as a courtesy, and I believe that's why we have to do that for New Heights and for Spellman and others, because we do provide for Brockton High. So when it comes to our students in the high school, even middle school, when they're taking the buses, now that we get the iPads, actually, we should have been using those years ago. Have the students scan when they get on the bus, because there are students that are probably taking the bus, they shouldn't be taking the bus. They're sneaking on. There's no way the bus driver is going to know. I know one of the bus stops near my house is a huge bus stop. But if we can, I mean, they're going to have their IDs on them anyways, and it's just scan them so we know who's on. First of all, it's a safety issue. God forbid something happens, we know who's on those buses. Second of all, we know if there are students that are taking the bus that shouldn't be on that bus. And there should be room for other students if the buses are I just think a little more efficient.
No, that's an interesting point, because I guess the way my mind works is, what about the students that are supposed to be taking the bus that aren't taking the bus?
Yes.
And they're just getting themselves there, and then we don't really need the bus, that was where my mind went. But that is also an excellent point, is, are we utilizing the buses appropriately? We actually do not need to provide transportation to middle school either. Is that correct, or am I getting that wrong?
Yeah,
It's 6 to 12 that we are not required to. Yeah, so by law, it's elementary. But
It's just
again,
elementary,
if we
okay.
do it here, then we have to do it for other schools too. And it's interesting because the DPAC actually, that I met with last night, they were asking, because we had some folks who came to public comment and were talking about the mileage and how, 1.5 is still really far for, a student of this age. And I actually was talking to them about it. It is all about priorities, right? It's all about, and so I'm not saying that it is not appropriate or that we shouldn't be providing it for middle school or high school. I'm just telling you what the law is. But I'm like, but the way transportation has existed here, is a demonstration of what our priorities are. That being said, over time, a community's priorities can shift, and I think that would definitely come from you all, come from the community, but it is about balancing, okay, what is the more important priority? Because at this point, we do follow a certain policy that it can be made and by this school committee, but is it most effective for our students? And that's really a question for you all. The question for me is making sure it works no matter what the policy is. But it's certainly something to think about, because I know both ways it can, that we have families that are concerned, that are that have young students, that 1.5 miles is not.
It's not.
They're not walking to see, you know, like, or so. Yeah.
So my last statement, because I know others have questions, is when I first came on the committee, we talked about going back to neighborhood schools, because I think that's another way of saving on busing. Plus, it helps students know. Like, I mean, growing up, I knew I was going to Franklin, I knew I was going to North, and I knew I was going to Brockton High. And these are your neighborhood kids. You grew up and you knew them. Things are different. Our community is very diverse. So going back to neighborhood schools, I know previous school committee members, we talked about going back to neighborhood schools. It would just make sense, rather than busing somebody that's at Brookfield over to the south side. If we have the services they need over on the north side, it just doesn't make sense to bus them back and forth. But that could be another way to save some money, is to keep them in the neighborhood schools if possible, and they do offer the services they need.
And we are definitely exploring that as well. That is more difficult, because I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying because of the specialized programming and populations that we don't have all of the programs at all of the schools. So that is definitely one of the things that we're looking at. But then we're also thinking about, okay, if there was a way to move towards that and that is more efficient, that is definitely a multi-year community conversation, right? You need families and parents to know that well ahead of time if you're moving their school, especially mid-cycle. So it's about thinking about not only, okay, if we were to move and try to go towards that model more, what would that entail? But then also, how would we transition that in over the years to cause less disruption to students in the middle of their schooling?
Yeah,
but yes,
definitely.
it's definitely something we're thinking about, but would be something that we would bring to this committee and probably to community conversations.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a key point on that, because the city we are the most diverse in the Commonwealth, and back in the 70s, 80s, it's a total different.
Right.
But we have to see how we get to that point, multi-year transition. But the other piece is that we do need to implement a policy on transportation, and what does that look like, so we can make sure that we key that up before school starts in September. So. Ms. Oliver, followed by Mrs. Sellum.
Thank you, Dr. T, for a great presentation. Now I know why all the anger and frustration, not only around this table, but also at City Hall with the city councils. Transportation is like hemorrhaging millions of dollars out, right? You haven't even been here a year, and you have gone deep down to the roots to find what's the cause of the hemorrhaging, instead of just putting a Band-Aid and walking away thinking it's going to get better. It's very shameful that we have vendors that basically causing fraud, taking monies from us, the way you just stated. I hope we have cut ties with those vendors that thought it was okay to bill for service they did not provide. I hope you're hearing me. It's very embarrassing that you would do that to our students, causing us millions of dollars for service that you did not provide. It's just frustrating and everything. And also, I get it. You have times that's coming up, and you got to take your vacation time, your sick time. But those absence number, it's worrisome. It's embarrassing that we have over 250 bus drivers absent in a month, which basically costs more money because we're using vendors. If we have that many educators out, we won't be able to educate our students. Are we finding out if is the repeat offenders that's doing that, calling out, and what are we doing about it?
So at any given time, 3 to 5 of those are long-term leaves, whether that's FMLA, whether that's a parental leave. So I do just want to make sure, so for the day that we looked at, for example, there were 21 that day. But I do want to just say about 3 to 5 at any time are a long-term leave that has been pre-approved and that they are legally entitled to. As for others that are repeat offenders, yes, we were actually working with HR today about what does that look like as far as following up and having those conversations. In fact, I was learning about sort of a process that existed last year, to the credit of the acting superintendent, that followed up much more thoroughly than I admit we've been doing this year. We've been kind of focusing on different areas of transportation versus holding accountable for absences, and there was a much stricter policy last year, or follow-up on that last year. So that is something I have learned of through this process, and so we will be implementing. But I also just want to say that, it is not my intention either to shame or our bus drivers. I do want to say that this has been a hard conversation, and what I'm hearing from our bus drivers too, again, is sort of a problem of our own making, which is that they are in a situation where they're like, are we going to be here or are we not? And if I have all these absences, I'm not saying it's right. Yeah. I think we still have to follow up. You're absolutely right. I just don't want our bus drivers, who I know are working very hard, and that it is not my intention. I just wanted to be transparent about it too, because I know that it was something that was asked for at City Council before, and I knew that I would need to be presenting it next week, and so I wanted to make sure you all saw it first. But I do think that we have some ownership in this conversation too, and there are things that we could be doing better to ensure better attendance. So I think it's both sides. I think that yes, there needs to be better attendance on the side of the bus drivers, but yes, we need to be following up short term and holding people accountable more. But then yes, I think also we need to be making a commitment to our bus drivers if we want them to commit to us.
Of course, and then we have to award those ones that are showing up and providing service to our students, and we are grateful for the bus driver. Believe me, they do deal with a lot in the bus, especially with certain students behavior-wise, and they're alone transporting us our students to school. But definitely, there also has to be accountability of those that repeatedly, call out. Are we tracking to make sure those ones that are calling out are not going to drive for private vendors?
That is, okay, so yes. So we are tracking, and this is part of our random checks too, is again to ensure that we know who is driving all of the private vendors. So that is serving that other purpose as well. If you're asking if we know of any, there are none that are on file as doing so. Okay. Those we have, because for every private vendor, we have the bus drivers, we have the licenses, we have their RMV history to ensure that it's clear. They turn all of that into us. So there is no record of having somebody who is double dipping. Okay. But I think what you're asking is slightly more nuanced, and that is part of the intention behind the random checks as well.
Perfect. I agree with that. Two things. The OA dashboard, love it. It's easy to follow, understand exactly what's going on. Whoever created that, kudos. And I think it's easy for all of us to follow and see in real time what's happening and how much we have left in budget. Do we have cameras on the stop sign on each buses, like when the stop sign comes out?
I know we have cameras because I've watched them before. They are all over the place. So I can see outside, inside. I can see the street. I don't know if they're actually on the stop sign, but I know there is an angle where we can see. Yes.
Are the drivers aware to call when cars pass through, are not obeying the stop sign?
I believe
I know we got reports multiple times drivers doing that throughout the city.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
I will follow up about that. I believe that's in the handbook that they receive. But what that looks like in practice, I don't actually know. So I'll find out.
Definitely look into it, because I know for experience they do that constantly with my son's van. Even though I have a sign outside my house that says, a child's getting picked up here, it's constantly happening. And I know I've got pictures from other areas in Brockton that cars are just basically don't care at this point and just driving right through the stop sign when there's buses or vans waiting to pick up students. I think that's something as a city just be mindful there is a child getting in that bus, and we don't want to, provoke any accident or injuries to the students going in. Thank you. Honestly, thank you. You've been completely transparent for the time you've been here, and just to get to the point where we need to move forward in your long-term ideas and goals with your team is incredible, because nobody was doing this in the past. The old administration to allow this to keep happening years after years. Kudos to you and your team for doing a great job. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I do just want to thank the team. Everybody has been working, because this requires a huge team effort. It requires expertise from every area. Our homeless liaison, everybody's having to come in and sort of provide their expertise, provide their lens, provide their, again, since a lot of these processes live both manually and in different spaces, it's requiring a lot of teamwork and a lot of conversation for us to kind of peel through it. So I do appreciate that. And for the Open Architects dashboard, so you just saw the transportation dashboard, but on Tuesday of next week during our regular school committee, you'll get to see that Open Architects, TJ and his team have created a dashboard for our entire budget.
Wow.
So you won't just be able to look at that was the transportation page, but you'll be able to pull our live spending, and all school committee members, once we've trained you all on it, will have access to go sign in and be able to look at our live spending every day. So you wouldn't even need those year-to-date reports. You can open it up, you can see where we are, you can manipulate it to pick a certain school, a certain program, so it's really quite impressive. And I know that was part of the contract that you all paid for with Open Architects. I think you'll be really pleased with the results.
I can't wait. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You will be amazed on how much work the team has done in with Open Architect with that dashboard. All the information is there, and it saves us money on getting things printed out. So we'll move that. Mrs. Sullivan.
Okay, thank you. It seems like a lot was done. I want to thank everybody that worked on this to save money. So it sounds like a really great plan. I just want to say something about the transportation contract, because I worked on that, me and Tim, with former school committee member Kathy Ellers, and they were given a very good contract, and a lot of the stuff we honored that we didn't want to honor. And so it's disappointing to see that there's a lot of absences. So I'm going to leave it at that. And on the neighborhood schools, I thought we were already doing neighborhood schools, because I know the kids in my neighborhood are assigned to Easton, that's the neighborhood school, and the other ones more on the Brookfield side are assigned to Ashfield. So I thought we were already assigning to our neighborhood school.
The majority of the students are. Yeah. So it's really only if, again, you require a special program or special service, or and since we don't have all of the programs at all of the schools, it doesn't always provide a family the ability to go to their neighborhood school.
Right, but that's understandable. So most of the kids are going to their neighborhood school.
There's one other time when they're unable to go to their neighborhood school, and that is enrollment. So another thing that we have been looking at is the zones. What is your zone, or what is your neighborhood? Because we certainly have schools where we have a lot of students that live in that neighborhood, and then others that less so. So that's been another conversation that we've been having, because that can sometimes make it so that a student could have gone to their neighborhood school, but now they can't because we just don't have the space.
Right. And so on the door-to-door transportation, that would be, are we still honoring the mileage, like a high school student has to be 1.5, or an elementary 1 mile? Are we still going by that, or?
Oh, you mean for special education door-to-door, or for our policy?
No, just for all students.
For all students, we are absolutely still following that policy. I did have some slides in the appendix for the sort of the rules about our special education students and the door-to-door placements and how those are kind of vetted through. Also for our McKinney-Vento students who are in foster care or who have been identified as homeless, because there are different requirements for those buckets of students.
Yeah, I'm talking about
but yeah, for those, we're following those guidelines.
Okay. Because you said it was up 300 or something.
So the 300 was the
Up 300.
That was the door-to-door. So
Yes.
that is students who it's identified as per their IEP. So that either happens at the meeting, or we do have students coming into the district already with an IEP that then requires it.
Right.
But yes, that was our largest jump, which was surprising to us too. I mean, I know we have a lot of students coming in, and I had heard it anecdotally that we had a lot more students coming in already with IEPs than we've had in the past. I think that number kind of made it very solid for me.
Right. So the active vendors are the ones that we're using right now. So
Correct.
90 active vendors.
Right, but there were 253 overall, and one of the things that we're looking at now is because we still have the emails of those vendors, they are not active in our system. They don't have their certificates of insurance or a contract or LOA signed by myself and the mayor. But one of the things we have actually been looking at, not necessarily to have more private vendors, but because we are going through this more competitive process now and putting out this sheet. Like today, we put out one of those routes and we had 15 responses within, like since this morning at like 2:30. So we are sending out these competitive bids to all of those emails so that they can fill in the form and put it on, which means that that number could potentially go up because we're happy to move to a different vendor who is going to give us a different price. Now that's going to take us a little longer because then we need the LOA, we need a certificate of insurance, but even when I was showing you that number up there of we have 90 active vendors, as of today, we have 91 because one of the vendors that we aren't working with bid a very good price and we want to work with them. So now we are going to be doing the letter of agreement. We'll be doing the certificate of insurance. We'll be bringing them on board and they'll be providing us, more cost-efficient service.
So those active vendors have gone through being checked by Mr. Jackson and all that.
Well, we're doing the random checks, but yes, all of the 90, they already have a letter of agreement that has the rates, the routes that has been signed by myself, has been signed by the mayor, has been uploaded into Munis. They also have a certificate of insurance that has been uploaded into Munis. And so that process still needs to be followed by anybody else who we bring on as active. So that would have to happen first.
Okay.
And then for your question, for the other, their checks on the licenses, their RMV history, things like that, that is provided to us by the vendors.
Okay.
But that's the random check we're doing, is
okay,
just to make
sounds
sure.
Like a great thing.
Yeah.
That's great. And just a comment on the busing, like the state used to give us money for the busing. I wonder what happened to that.
They do. It's just
Okay.
not enough. And so that's what all of the superintendents are going to be talking about at the legislative breakfast, is that the costs have risen and the reimbursements have risen a bit, but they have not stayed in line with the inflating costs. So it's making it very difficult for districts to kind of bridge that gap. So what we're requesting, they can't make our transportation cheaper. What they can do is provide a greater reimbursement. So that's what we're asking, and that's what we're advocating for with all of our legislators.
Wow, that sounds like it's going to be a good meeting.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, if they agree, then
Yep.
yes.
That's great work, though, on that. Yeah, thank you.
All set. Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you for the presentation. I noticed on one of your slides you had 2 field trips. Are those free, or are they paying for it?
So for that particular day, that's a great question. I don't know for that particular day, but it can be both. Sometimes it is done internally. That's what we prefer to do. Sometimes we have to do it privately. A lot of it will depend on the timing of the field trip. So a lot of our schools and our educators know that here's the time period where then we can use our internal buses, which is more preferable. But there are times that we will use private transportation. There's also times too where when we're using private transportation for our field trips, it is funded through a grant, for example, for a specific project or initiative that our students are working on. So it's not always funded by us, but it can be either or. So we try first to opt internal, but we do sometimes have to use external.
Just for a statement of fact that I'm probably the only person here that drove a school bus. I used to do charter work and everything else. And people used to rent the bus, to go to Fenway Park, go to Boston Garden, up Museum of Science. It wasn't free, that people had to pay for it. At least pay for the driver and the gas.
So you mean chartering out our buses?
Charter, yeah.
Yes. So we actually have done that. We have received payment for that. That was for last summer, was the last time we chartered buses. The reason we have not at this point in time is because one thing I didn't include in the presentation, but we'll include at a future presentation, there's just so much to cover with transportation, is our warranties on our buses coming up. And so there has been, we are trying to be a little bit more mindful of the wear and tear on our buses, because we are now hitting, I guess y'all had started purchasing them about so we are hitting that 5-year mark where some of our warranties are going to be up. So we're trying to figure out, okay, what next when we no longer have there's engine coverage, there's all these different kinds of coverage, body coverage. So what happens when some of these things lapse, and what is our plan? So that's another reason we're being a little bit more conservative with the charters. But there were charters last summer.
So if somebody calls today or tomorrow and wants to go to Boston Garden to watch the Bruins, you're not going to go?
I don't know that we have a mechanism in place right now to charter buses. I know that there was in the past, but I'll be honest, I've been focusing more on the
There's a lot of money to be made at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just something to think about.
Yeah.
And the other question is, have you found a parking space in a garage for these buses?
We have the bus depot, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we put out the bid for the bus depot, and we do have an executed contract for it.
You mean at the fairgrounds?
Yes.
That's not forever.
No, but the contract was for,
3 years.
3 years,
It's a
thank you.
3-year contract.
Because I know that the owner wants to put apartments there. So you're going to be out in the street.
Yes, very likely, yeah.
I just wanted to bring it up. I brought it up to Dr. Cobbs when he was acting superintendent, that the old Shaw School on North Quincy Street has 3 acres of land there behind it. That building is condemned. It's got a big X on the front, but it would have to be torn down. But you still have the 3 acres of land that is Brockton Public Schools owned right now. You could park the buses there.
Okay. All right, we will definitely look into what are the other options.
Because I know they want to put apartments there, so that's going to be.
Right. So I know I've engaged in this discussion a little bit with the city team. I know they've been thinking about this a little bit more and have some options for city-owned land. So I know that it's a conversation being had. I can certainly come back with more information. I know I've seen some potential plans. I think maybe the mayor could better speak to it, but it is certainly something we will make sure. We'll make sure we have a place to park the buses.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Vega.
Like everyone said, incredible. It's just nice to set some markers up at the beginning of the year, say here's what we're trying to hit by when, and then to watch you and the team hit those marks. That's fantastic. So when we talk about that 300 plus that Ms. Sullivan brought up for door to door, right? I think what I've heard you say is, hey, the number of IEPs have increased. So do we have the data on what? Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have the data from past years that shows the growth? And where I'm going with it is like, do we have the metrics? Do we have the data in hand that will allow us to make a reasonable guesstimate about what next year's transportation costs, factoring in whatever trends we're seeing around growth in certain areas?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I know that the presentation that I saw for tomorrow morning's breakfast actually is talking more holistically, not just about Brockton, but about those trends for special education, because obviously the cost is directly related to the increasing services. And so that is definitely, we can provide that Brockton specific data for sure. To answer your question, no, we haven't really thought about the projections for transportation and what it would cost, but we should, because you're right, again, it's just going to continue to kind of climb. One of the things we've been thinking about with that in particular is the class space and the staffing.
Okay.
But yes, you're right. There is a transportation component of it that we need to keep our eye on as well.
No, I appreciate that. You mentioned that we are choosing to transport our high school students, right? And that is not something that we have to do, but it's something that we've chosen to do. What are the alternatives to doing that, if any?
So they can get themselves to school. The other option is that, and some communities do that, but again, it's a priority. It's a priority shift. Also, some districts do provide bus passes as well as another alternative, and I know that's something I've actually spoken to the mayor about our BAT buses, and if that would even be a possibility, or if there would be capacity. So those are generally the options.
Yeah, and I mean, my high school experience and the high school experience of many folks who grew up, I grew up in Queens, New York. We had a bus system very similar to the BAT system, and it was there was no buses bringing us to high school classes. It was all either walking, parents, and there was a considerable number of students like myself who got on the bus, and that bus pass gave them a free ride to and from school that worked really well. I know it's a controversial topic. I know but it's something we're gonna have to look at and figure out what we do next. Yeah. Do we have any sense of how much cost is associated with high school transportation versus middle school versus elementary?
So I can bring you the data as far as the number of students in all of those grade levels, and then how many buses are being used and where they could be shifted to. Right now, obviously, I mean, it's not free, right? But we're doing it internally, so there's not like we can't break it down by private vendor cost in the same way. But we could certainly do an analysis of like if we were to shift those resources, what we could be potentially saving.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Ms. Azak.
Thank you. Just a quick question. So, to Mr. Vega's point, having just one high school is what makes it difficult, because usually you might have two that are split up, one on either side of the city, so it makes it easier for shorter transportation for some of our students. But having just one huge high school that's like a little campus, a college campus, is the issue that we ran into. It's a great campus, but it just makes it difficult. And I believe that's one of the reasons we have so many buses up at the high school. And then just a little clarification. I know we looked at the Shaw School in years past. I believe it's back with the city. It's no longer with the school department. And I know when Mr. Thomas was superintendent, we had talked about having our pre-K there, doing maybe like one of those prefab buildings and have the younger students there. I know it might be 3 acres. I don't know the exact acreage. I just don't think it was large enough at the time when we looked into it. Plus, you also have to look at if you have buses that are parking, you have to have, you have things that are coming. I'm not a mechanic, but, things that go along with, you have to have that area set up to have a long-term parking. And I think that, and then the BAT buses. So I was the other day, I don't remember which middle school it was, but there was quite a few kids that were coming off of a BAT bus. And that might not be that might be a better option to see if we can get more designated for the students to alleviate some of that. If we have a larger amount of students that are coming from certain areas, to maybe bus them to the high school. I don't know what the cost savings would be. Again, this is all new. We're in the right direction right now when we're looking at numbers and ways to save. So we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting idea, because to your point about having the one high school and everybody coming to it from all sides of Brockton, that's difficult. But to your point, we have multiple middle schools. So maybe that's, rather than jumping straight to high school, maybe we need to be thinking about that.
Designated. I can't remember which school it was, but I was so surprised. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of kids that are on that bus. And it was one of the mornings a couple of weeks ago. And I didn't realize so many students were taking the BAT bus early in the morning.
Right.
And it was a middle school. I just can't remember which one. I don't know. I want to say it was like near Plouffe or something offhand, but still, I mean, a lot of them are on the main roads.
Yeah.
And they do go by a lot of bus stops, so they can be designated for Brockton, BHS or something. But like I said, we're headed in the right direction. We're great talks, great presentation, and looking forward to seeing how we're gonna get this, polished up a little so we can move forward and work on our little money issue. But thank you.
Thank you. Before I impine any more further questions by the members. Thank you. I know we participate in the roundtable with transportation. It's been going on for quite some time. Is how do we quantify and fix this to make sure that we're being cost efficient so we can provide the services. The only one of the that needs to be out there is, and I understand our colleagues at City Hall, has this impression that, specifically, we were paying X amount of dollars, $12 million a year for transportation. How did it jump up to 18 all of a sudden? They need to be educated to know that it's always been that number. There's just been different funding sources, which shouldn't have happened. Unfortunately it did, but they just need to understand that it's always been this cost. It wasn't something that just ballooned up. It's just that they weren't comfortable enough or didn't have the knowledge of knowing what the actual number was. So, that's one of the things that, even with us, that was a learning experience to us as well. It's just like, how did this balloon up? But I'm just trying to, I know that the city is self-insured. With our buses, like, how does that insurance fall into place? I'm just trying to remember if are we insuring our buses, and what is the
Yes.
What is the cost? And
So remember, that's what we're working on
Okay.
with the city right now.
Yeah.
So a breakdown of all of our costs in health insurance by our different collective bargaining units.
Okay. The again, it's when we look at and I know a lot of folks on the transportation, we all get those calls. We get them from city councils, we get them from parents, we get them from our employees. They're not saying that our drivers are the issue. There is an issue there. They just need to understand that I understand the contract's the contract. If that's their time, they're able to use that. But there is a cost when they do call out sick, and those numbers are alarming. I understand that there are certain people that are out on FMLA, but just the information that I got, and I had to kind of break it down to me. What is the actual cost when a driver calls out? And depending upon the tiers that they drive, if they don't, let's say for example, you have 25 drivers call out, and they were only able to cover 5 routes, so that you say that, we're only using 20 vendors. It's not 20 vendors. It can jump up to 25 to 30 or possibly 40 because of their tiers. So the average cost when we don't have coverage is about $600 per driver. So there is a huge cost to that. Not saying that they're not sick, they're able to use that, we understand that, but when you want something to work, and I know some of them are going, he's saying that. Yes, I'm going to say it because I am black and white. You have to work with us to make our decision much easier than making it harder for us to say this isn't working, this is a piece of the pie that's costing us. And that number is not it's probably $1 million. We don't have those figures, but it's up there. There is a cost to when they call out. So that's something that the management team needs to work on, and making sure that we're obviously supporting them whatever health issues or anything else that's going on. The other piece is our private vendors. When it comes to when we talk about, do we have cameras on our buses? Do these private vendors have cameras on their buses? That's something that we collectively have to make. So if we have to hold our bus transportation of, our department accountable with, having these security measures on our vehicles, I think that should be extended over to the private vendors as well, because it falls under security, where we do have these vendors that, parents are not sending the child to school because they don't know who that individual is. How are we tracking that vehicle when that child gets in that vehicle? because we don't know who they are. So somebody could just pull up and they jump in, and God forbid anything happens. But we need to be able to make sure that those private vendors can provide us that data of when did you pick up this child, when did you drop them off, to make sure that we're able to track that. And the same thing as Ms. Oliver said, you know, vehicles that are driving by when we have the stop sign on an hour, that's something more of the law enforcement community. So it's more of the transportation, working with Lieutenant Bernalker in the police department to address those, because those data are easily pulled off of the camera system. So those are one of the conversations that obviously that we're working for, towards to address, making sure the safety measures are there, and also bringing down our costs. So as we've seen, this is a work in progress, and thank you to the superintendent and her team, and everybody in transportation that's working hard. Mrs. Kim Sai, Ken, Sharon, everybody that's doing a lot of work. I see it firsthand. Superintendent's like, you got to get out of here when I've been down at Central because we have a lot of work. But it's eye-opening, and I know there's a lot of people watching, and this is something that needs. We're working actively to correct, to make sure that transportation does stay under our umbrella, because when the committee at the time took it in, it was something that was supposed to be a cost savings to us. And also, I don't want to say make us money, but that was what portrayed to us that, Mr. Sullivan indicated, of chartering our buses out. I don't know what it could make us, if it's $300,000, $400,000, whatever. So those costs, that money that we make, can offset some of our expenses to fuel and so forth. We don't want to limit how we transport our students, number one, because that's going to have an effect on our attendance. That's huge for us, and we want to make sure that if we can transport every student, if we can eliminate the mileage, we can, but then there's a huge cost to that. So, but as I said, I'm in those active conversations, and any of the members that has any questions relative to where we are, we could just reach out to the superintendent and get those answers, because we do meet on a regular basis of where are we in trying to fix this little hiccup that we have in transportation. So thank you for that presentation. Phenomenal as always. Mrs. Azak has a follow-up question.
I keep taking the mic, but safety is number one. So Mr. Rodriguez actually just reminded me. So when we do this letter of agreement with the vendors, we did have an issue. It was prior to you being our superintendent. There was an issue, and I remember it was a Friday right before Christmas vacation, and we had a vendor. So if we can put in our paperwork, if the driver is not the regular driver and there is a substitute driver picking up a student, they are to notify the school. We did have, remember the driver showed up, same vehicle, same color, everything. It was an SUV. They picked up the student, but they ended up dropping off the student at the Boys and Girls Club. And for hours, they were looking for the student, and they had called the Boys and Girls Club, and no one knew that the student was there till it was time when they were locking up. So if we can just tweak a little bit, if they are to switch out the drivers, it's not your regular driver. I mean, this is a good-sized packet, but they do need to notify the school, and they have to show ID, a picture ID or something. Just, we're putting our students in vehicles. It's a safety issue.
And that's why we're doing the random checks, because they absolutely are supposed to let us know. And we are supposed to have the substitute drivers also on file and have all of their appropriate paperwork.
And make sure Corey checks and things like that. And then
That's
on
yeah.
a lighter note, so like our teachers and our staff, our bus drivers, we have so many amazing bus drivers. And I know, I hear some of the stories, and there's a few bus drivers I am familiar with, and I see the stories they post and stuff, and they're the first smile that our students see before they get to the school. So I just want to thank them. I know this is, we're doing what we can because of safety and trying to save money, but I also want to thank the ones that are going out of their way, reaching out to us, trying to better things, and actually just being that smile, being that friendly face every day, and high-fiving the kids, and the stories. It's just heartwarming. So I just want to thank them for those that are just going above and beyond. We do appreciate it. So this is it's the tough talk that we have to have, but on a lighter note, we do have some amazing staff. Like I said, our staff, our teachers, and our drivers. So thank them.
Thank you. Any more questions? There's one, I know this is, I get this a lot from some of the drivers, is they have bus monitors on there, and most of them, they're paraprofessionals, but their contract has a certain language. But then like, how do we, you know, because they're in union and they're in union, it's like not crossing boundaries. But the biggest thing is that some drivers are reporting that they're going out of their way to pick up the paraprofessionals, which is putting more mileage and strain on there and causing delays. So like, how is that being addressed? Because now what you're gonna get is two unions, you know, intermingling. But that's one of the biggest, you know, one of the biggest ones that I get on a weekly basis is this picking up of paraprofessionals.
Yes, and it's worked differently in different years, is my understanding. And there are two things that we're doing to address it. One thing is the payment aspect of it. So we are in negotiations with VESPA right now, and so we are addressing sort of the cost associated with it, but then also what are the procedures as far as signing in, ensuring the delivery of those services, that people, you know, are reporting and doing that duty. And so that's one thing, because we also need to have checks and balances for that. And then we need to make sure that that's appropriately compensated. But then the other thing about the actual routes and how bus drivers are getting their monitors is part of the larger route conversation, because we know that the routes need to be more efficient, and we know that the monitor and where the location of the monitor needs to be something that we are taking into account in the routing. So that is something that we are looking at, because it is not, I can say right now, it is not efficient as it currently stands.
Thank you. I don't know if you have the answer to this, maybe Mr. Sullivan, because I know he was involved in transportation. So our drivers, they have to have a certain standard when it comes to drug testing. How does that, it's a federal standard, but how does that correlate with our private vendors? Where are we able to, I mean, obviously it's a policy, so I'm not sure.
So all of those records are the ones that have to be provided to us. So their R&V history, their certifications, all of that needs to be provided to us. And they have, there's a drug testing policy. I know that we have something for our internal ones and then something for our external, but it is something that we keep track of.
So when they provide, you know, John Smith is driver for ABC Transportation, is there like a drug test that's basically saying, certifying, listen, you have to go to Quest Diagnostic and provide a drug test, and that this person, whatever that.
Right. It's part of their, I'm sorry, I'll have to get you the details on this. It is
right.
part of their licensing and recertification. So every year they have to do a recertificate, I'm not using the appropriate terms with the RMV, and it is part of that process, but I can get you the actual technical terms, what it's called and what the process is.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions. Any last comments or questions by any members? No? See none, and
I have
the floor is yours.
Yes, I have one last comment, and it is that, because I do imagine this is going to be a topic of a conversation, I will be presenting to the City Council this presentation, and based on some of the feedback or questions you have asked, and then some of the things we just didn't have time to get into this presentation, you will see some additional information in that presentation. And so, but also one of the things that I know is going to come up is the funding. So what is the overall projection? Because I mentioned at the very first meeting that I was there that we are looking at 19.5 to 20, and we have 16 right now. So the question is naturally, how are we funding the rest? There are mechanisms within our own budget that we have been exploring to do that. And I am reluctant, to Mr. Sullivan's point last week, to put it all on the city and to go back and request more millions of dollars from the city. Yes, it is a requirement under the net and non-net, funding sources. That being said, there are some ways and creative ways that we can offset some of these costs within our own funding sources that are varied, such as circuit breaker. So there are some other areas that we can look for those funds. And that is a determination that I could make, but obviously I would want to do it in full transparency of this committee. But one of the things that I do think is important as we're thinking about funding transportation specifically for this year, because as I've stated right there, we have some serious inefficiencies that are certainly on us. I cannot put these on anybody at the city and say that they didn't do something they were supposed to do. We own this, whether, good, bad, the ugly, the what's broken, it's ours. And, maybe we weren't here to create it, but it is our job to fix it, and it is our job to fund it in this year, which is going to be difficult. Now, I do believe that even with the additional projections for next year for special education, we will be in a better spot next year because we are going to be going out to formal bid. We are building in these competitive processes. But as I'm thinking about this year and funding it, I do want to just let the committee know that I am considering funding sources that are within our own budget. I don't know if it will cover the entire amount or gap that we still have. And again, some of it we're trying to bridge through some of these cost savings, but again, in the last 4 months of school, probably not. We're not going to be able to make up enough of that. So I just want to put it out on the table that this is something that I do think and I do recommend that we look to our own resources as best we can in order to, support transportation for this year. I know that we're collaborating with the city really well. We're doing our best. I know there's a give and take on both sides of this. And I know that there has been, a give and take in the past on both sides of this. And I think this is an area where we potentially need to be giving and supporting the city since we have the means to do so. So I'm just putting that out there. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on it or discuss it, but it is something also, I just want to be transparent that it is something that we are, that I'm looking at, and that when they ask me at City Council that I'll have to respond to. So if you had thoughts about how I should be responding to that, or if there were any strong opinions one way or another, I would certainly be interested in hearing them, as I don't want to go before them and say something that is completely untrue.
No, thank you for that. No, I totally agree with you on, working, because it is coming out of one pot. But the other thing, and as I said in black and white, is that for the past 2 years, the city has always cut our budget, knowing that what we requested for to actually fund our transportation. So I'll stand on that. It's been $4 million deficit here. There's been a $6 million deficit here. We requested, we voted, this is what transportation cost us, but not putting the onus on here is that the managerial funding source on the city side needs to do a better job on their side, because that's what the cost is. You can't hide it. It's in black and white. But if we do have the means, and I do support it 100%, to help the city, which we've been helping the city forever. I mean, just look at the end of the year reports on DESI's website and look at the Schedule 19, and it'll tell you how that we've been actually supporting the city. So, but again, we just have to make sure that it doesn't send the city in a spiral, and finances is one of the biggest things. So anything that we can do as a committee to make sure that, overall that the taxpayers are not, but the taxpayers are already paying for it, but just to make sure that those costs are down and it's not something that's going to strain city services, which is being provided at the moment. So that's my piece on that one. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain. Motion was made by Mr. Sullivan.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Oliver. Oh, actually, before that, any other business? No, seeing none. Show of hands. Unanimous. Meeting adjourned.